The text message came in at 2014 on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage eating a sad desk lunch I'd brought from home. My phone buzzed against the center console. I expected it to be my husband asking if I'd remembered to schedule the HVAC guy. Instead, it was my mother-in-law. "Sweetheart, I know this isn't my place, but I've been carrying this for too long. Call me when you're alone. Please don't tell him I reached out. I read it 3 times. Then I set my sandwich down on the passenger seat and stared at the concrete pillar in front of me. My mother-in-law and I weren't close. She was pleasant enough at Thanksgiving, complimented my casseroles, asked polite questions about my work as a hospital administrator, but she had never once texted me something that felt like a warning. That felt like a woman bracing herself. I called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Eleanor." Her voice was low, careful. "Are you somewhere private?" "Parking garage," I said. "What's going on?" She exhaled slowly, the kind of exhale that carries years of something held in. "I need to ask you something first, and I need you to answer honestly. Has your husband ever mentioned a woman named Cassie?" "Cassidy Holbrook. Used to go by Cass." The name meant nothing to me. I told her that. Another pause. "Longer this time?" "Eleanor," she said. "I think you need to know something about the boy." My husband and I had been married for 5 years. We met when I was 28, when I was fresh out of a graduate program in Health Services Administration, and he was 32, managing a mid-sized logistics company his father had built. He was steady. That was the word I always used for him. Steady, reliable, the kind of man who showed up on time and remembered to change the smoke detector batteries without being asked. We'd talked about children. We'd tried for about a year before my doctor suggested some tests. Nothing catastrophic, just some timing issues on my end. Some additional monitoring recommended. We'd been in that quiet, cautious stretch of trying but not talking about it when he came home one evening and told me his college roommate had a nephew who needed placement. A little boy just turned 4. The roommate's sister had apparently gotten into a bad situation. Drugs, the story went, instability, couldn't care for the child. My husband said he'd mentioned us, said we were good people. Said maybe we'd consider fostering, at least temporarily. I remember standing in the kitchen, dish towel still in my hands, looking at my husband's face. He seemed nervous in a way I couldn't quite read. I thought it was the weight of the ask, the seriousness of what he was proposing. "His name is Ben," he told me. "He's a good kid, smart. He just needs stability." I said yes. Of course I said yes. I thought I was helping. Ben came to us 6 weeks later with a single backpack and a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. He was small for his age, dark-haired, with these wide gray eyes that watched everything from a distance before he'd let himself react to it. He cried the first night, quietly, in a way that was somehow worse than screaming. I sat outside his door for 2 hours. Within a month, I loved him. Not the careful, provisional love of someone fostering a stranger's child. I loved him the way you love someone who fits into a space you didn't know was empty. The adoption finalized 8 months later. My husband cried in the courthouse hallway. I cried in the car, then fell asleep on the drive home, his rabbit tucked under his chin, and I watched him in the rearview mirror and thought, this is it. This is what we were supposed to find. That was 3 years ago. My mother-in-law's voice on the phone was thin and careful, like she was walking a surface she didn't fully trust. She told me she had run into someone at her church's fall fundraiser 6 weeks earlier. A woman she'd known peripherally years back, someone who'd been in her husband's social orbit before he passed. This woman had a younger daughter. The younger daughter, she told my mother-in-law, had recently gotten out of a long-term treatment program, was doing well, was trying to reconnect with her child. My mother-in-law had smiled and said how wonderful, and the woman had said, yes, though it's complicated, Because the boy has been with his father for years now. His father, not a foster family, not a roommate's referral. His father. I didn't say anything right then. My mother-in-law told me. I told myself I had to be wrong, that maybe it was coincidence. But I kept thinking about it, and I kept thinking about how he never wanted you to meet the roommate, and how the story never quite added up. And Eleanor, I am so sorry. I should have pushed harder back then. I should have asked more questions. I was very still in that parking garage. I noticed I'd stopped breathing normally and made myself inhale. You're saying Ben is his son, I said. His biological son. I think so, she whispered. I think Cassidy is Ben's mother. And I think my son knew that when he brought that boy into your home. I am not a woman who falls apart easily. I grew up the oldest of 3, with a mother who worked nights and a father who was more absence than presence, and I learned early that someone had to stay functional when everything else was spinning. That trait had served me well in hospital administration, where things go wrong constantly and someone has to keep a clear head and figure out the next step. I use that same part of my brain now. I did not confront my husband that evening. I came home, made dinner, asked about his day, watched him play a card game with Ben on the living room floor. I watched the way Ben laughed at something my husband said, the easy comfort of it, and I felt something in my chest that I couldn't name yet. Not anger, not quite. Something more complicated and worse. That night, after Ben was asleep and my husband had taken his work call in the office, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and started pulling at threads. Cassidy Holbrook was not difficult to find. Her Facebook profile was mostly private, but her profile photo was visible. A woman in her early 30s, dark-haired, gray-eyed, same jaw as Ben, same particular way the corners of her mouth turned when she smiled. I sat with that image for a long time. Then I kept going. My husband had mentioned the roommate by name years ago. I had a good memory for details I wasn't supposed to need. I found the roommate on LinkedIn. His sister, listed in an old Facebook tag from years back, was named Cassidy. Last name before a brief marriage had been the same as my husband's college roommate. Holbrook had come later. I searched our shared cloud storage, the folder where we backed up documents and photos. In a subfolder labeled Miscellaneous 2019, buried under tax prep scans and appliance warranty PDFs, I found a photograph I had never seen. My husband and a dark-haired woman, both much younger, standing in front of what looked like a state fair. They were not posing like old friends. His hand was at her waist in the particular way that meant something. I noted the timestamp on the file. I closed the laptop. I went to bed and lay next to my husband in the dark and thought about how, in approximately 3 years of marriage before Ben arrived, he had never once mentioned Cassidy Holbrook's name. Not once. Over the next 2 weeks, I built a case the way I'd approach a compliance audit at work, quietly, methodically, without letting anyone know the audit was happening. I called my mother-in-law back and asked her to put me in touch with the woman from church. Her name was Sandra, and she was careful on the phone at first, protective of her daughter in the way mothers are when they've watched someone struggle. But when I explained who I was, not the wife looking for a fight, but the woman who'd been raising Cassidy's son for 3 years, she got very quiet, and then she said, "Oh, honey. Sandra told me Cassidy had gotten pregnant at 24. The father was someone she'd been seeing on and off for a couple of years, someone she'd believed cared about her. When she told him she was pregnant, he helped her move into a better apartment. He was present for the birth. She believed they were building something. Then she had a difficult postpartum year, depression, some bad decisions, a downward spiral that got worse when she started leaning on things that weren't good for her. He had pushed for temporary custody. Just until she stabilized, he said. She'd agreed, because she thought it was temporary. She thought when she got better, they'd figure it out together. Instead, She got a letter from an attorney informing her that the child had been placed in foster care pending adoption proceedings. By a good family, the letter assured her this was best for the boy. She had not been informed about the specific family. She had been, in her own words, managed out of her son's life while she was too sick and too broken to fight it effectively. She'd spent the last 2 years getting well enough to try to find him. I told Sandra that I wanted to meet Cassidy. She was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. "I'm going to fix it," I said. "As much as it can be fixed." We met at a diner in a suburb 40 minutes from my house. I got there early and took a corner booth and drank a coffee and watched the door. Cassidy Holbrook walked in looking like someone who had learned to be braced for bad news. She was thin, neatly dressed in a way that felt like effort, with Ben's exact gray eyes scanning the room until they found me. She stopped for just a second, recognizing something maybe, the same way I had when I'd seen her photo. She sat down across from me and did not say anything for a moment. "He looks good?" she finally asked. Her voice was careful, controlled in a way I recognized as someone who needed to keep it that way or it would go. "He's wonderful," I said, and I meant it, and I watched her face do something complicated and private. "He's smart. He's kind. He's obsessed with marine biology right now, sharks specifically. He can tell you things about great white sharks that will make you genuinely uncomfortable." She laughed once, short and surprised, and pressed her hand over her mouth. We sat together for 2 hours. I told her what I knew. She filled in what I didn't. By the end, the whole shape of it was visible. My husband had never lost touch with her. He had monitored the situation. He had known when she was at her lowest, and he had moved strategically, leveraging his resources and a compliant attorney to acquire custody of his own biological son while keeping me entirely in the dark about who that child actually was. He had brought his son into my home and let me love him and never told me the truth. And Cassidy, who was now 18 months sober, who had a steady job doing bookkeeping for a small contractor, who had a therapist she saw every week and a mother who'd helped her put her life back together piece by piece, had been circling the edges of her son's life for years, not even knowing his last name had been changed. "I'm not trying to take him from you," she said, near the end. She was looking at her coffee cup. "I know that's probably what you're afraid of, but he knows you. You're his family. I don't want to blow his world apart." "He deserves to know you exist," I said. "He deserves the truth about where he came from." She looked up at me then, and her eyes were wet, and she nodded. I did not confront my husband immediately. I'm aware that might seem strange, that I knew what I knew and kept sitting across from him at dinner and going about my days. But I needed 2 things first. I needed documentation, and I needed a lawyer. For documentation, I had my mother-in-law's account, Sandra's testimony, my own conversation with Cassidy, the photograph I'd found in the cloud storage, and a timeline of inconsistencies I'd been building for 2 weeks. But I wanted more. I wanted paper. I hired a family law attorney who did not practice anywhere near our neighborhood, someone my husband had no connection to. I drove to her office on a Wednesday morning while he thought I was at a quarterly review. Her name was on a referral list my hospital used for employee assistance situations, which meant she was discreet. I laid everything out. She listened without interrupting, took notes, and then sat back and looked at me. "First thing," she said, "is a DNA test. Before anything else moves, you need biological confirmation. Everything is stronger with it." I told her I had Ben's hairbrush at home and could get a sample without him knowing. She nodded. She said she'd arrange an at-home paternity kit sent to a private lab, results in 5 to 7 business days. Second thing, she said, I needed to understand what I wanted as an outcome, not just emotionally. Legally. Did I want to stay married? Did I want to fight for custody? Did I want to dissolve everything? I sat in that chair and thought about my husband's face in the courthouse hallway crying, and whether those had been real tears. I want full legal custody of Ben, I said, and I want Cassidy to have the right to know her son. My attorney's expression didn't change. And your husband? He can explain himself to a judge, I said. The DNA results came back on a Friday. My attorney called me at work and I took it in a conference room with the door closed. Probability of paternity, 99.998%. I thanked her, hung up, and sat for a minute with my hands flat on the table. Then I called my mother-in-law. She answered on the second ring, and I told her the result, and there was a long, terrible silence. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," she finally said. Her voice had broken open entirely. "He was my son, and I loved him, and I am so sorry for what he did to you, and to that woman, and to that little boy." "I know," I said. "I know you are. What are you going to do?" "What I should have been given the chance to do 3 years ago," I said. "Made decisions with the actual truth." That evening, I asked my mother-in-law to come stay with Ben for the night. I told Ben that Grandma was coming for a sleepover, that they could order pizza and watch whatever he wanted. He was thrilled. He ran to pick out movies while I packed a small bag for him, and I hugged him at the door when she arrived and held on for maybe 2 seconds longer than usual. He looked up at me. "You okay, Mom?" "Yeah, Bud," I said. "I'm good." After they left, I sat in the living room and waited for my husband to get home from work. He came in the way he always did, keys in the bowl by the door, jacket over the chair. "Hey, where's Ben?" Before he'd even fully walked in. And I said, "With your mother for the night." And something shifted in his face. Just slightly, just enough. He sat down across from me. I didn't raise my voice. I had thought about this moment for 2 weeks, had felt the fury of it at 3 in the morning, had rehearsed a dozen different versions. What came out was quieter than any of them. I told him I knew. I told him I knew about Cassidy. I told him about the DNA test. I told him I had documentation, an attorney, and a very clear picture of what had happened and when. His face went through several things rapidly. Denial reached the surface first, the reflex of a man who had been keeping a secret for years, but it died fast. He could see from my face that there was no version of this where the lie still had somewhere to go. "Eleanor, don't," I said. "Just tell me the truth." I wasn't. Hear you say it out loud. Not for me. For Ben, eventually, because someday he is going to ask me what happened, and I want to be able to tell him that at least his father told the truth once. He told me the truth once. He told me the truth. It was largely what I already knew, but hearing it was different from assembling it from evidence. He and Cassidy had been on and off for years. When she got pregnant, he panicked. He wasn't in love with her, he said, as if that were the operative detail. He didn't want the complication. When she started struggling, he saw an opening. He hired an attorney. He told her it was temporary. He never intended for it to be temporary. He had met me 8 months later. He had Matee 8 months later. He had decided, at some point in that early stretch of dating, that I was someone he could build a life with. That maybe the timing could work, that he could bring his son into our family without ever explaining the particulars. "You used me," I said. He flinched. "I loved you." "You used me," I said again. "You needed someone stable and willing, and you used me to give your son a normal life while his actual mother was trying to find him. I was a solution to a problem you created." He didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer. I told him what was going to happen. He was going to move out of the house. He was going to cooperate fully with the custody proceedings. He was going to consent to Cassidy having supervised contact with Ben, leading to a co-parenting arrangement determined with Ben's therapist and the attorney. He was going to tell Ben the truth, with support from a family counselor, in a way that was appropriate for a 7-year-old. If he fought any of it, the documentation I had would be presented fully, including the details of how Cassidy had lost contact with her son. "You can't keep him from me," my husband said. His voice had gone tight, defensive. "He's my son." "He is your son," I said. "And he's the boy I've raised for 3 years, and he deserves 2 parents who put him first. You want to be one of those parents? Then start right now, tonight, by agreeing to do this correctly." He agreed. It wasn't gracious. He cried, and I didn't find it as satisfying as I might have expected. Mostly, I just felt tired. I told Ben on a Sunday, with a counselor present, in the counselor's office that had been carefully arranged to feel nothing like a clinical space, bean bags, a tank of fish against one wall, a basket of fidget things on the coffee table. I had talked with the counselor twice beforehand to figure out the language. Simple, honest, age-appropriate, with room for questions and with the understanding that this would not be the only conversation, that he could come back to it whenever he needed to. Ben sat beside me on a beanbag and listened with the focused intensity he brought to everything. When I told him he had a birth mother, and that she had wanted him and had missed him, and that she was a person he could know if he wanted to, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Does she know about the sharks?" I laughed before I could stop myself. The counselor smiled. "Not yet," I said. "You could tell her." He thought about that. "Okay," he said. "Maybe." The first meeting between Ben and Cassidy was at a park, on a Saturday in early spring, with both of us present and the counselor nearby on a bench. Cassidy brought him a book about ocean animals. She hadn't known about the shark thing specifically, just guessed he might like nature, and when Ben opened it and saw the great white on page 47, he looked up at her with an expression of pure, uncomplicated delight. "Do you know how fast they can swim?" he asked her. She shook her head, watching him with something that was almost too much to look at directly. 25 miles per hour, he said. "That's way faster than a person." "That's terrifying," she said. "I know," he agreed, very seriously. "That's why they're amazing." I stood a few feet away and watched my son show his mother why sharks were the most incredible things in the ocean, and I thought about all the conversations he'd had without her in them, all the things she'd missed, and all the things that were still ahead. The math of what had been lost didn't get easier to look at. But the thing in front of me, this boy, this woman, this ordinary miracle of a park bench conversation, that part was real. That part was ours to build on. It has been 7 months since that afternoon in the parking garage. My divorce was finalized 3 months ago efficiently and without the fighting my attorney had prepared me for. My husband, my ex-husband, has regular parenting time, supervised for the first stretch per the court agreement, unsupervised now, structured around what works for Ben. Cassidy has dinner with us twice a month. It started as formal and strange and has slowly become less so. Ben calls her by her first name, which the counselor said was fine, whatever felt natural to him. Sometimes he tells her things he's already told me, and she listens like she's hearing them for the first time, because for her, she is. My mother-in-law calls every Sunday. She has never made excuses for her son, which I respect more than I can say. She loves Ben and she shows up, and that is what I ask of anyone. I don't know yet what our family looks like in 5 years. I don't know how Ben will feel about all of this when he's 15 or 25 or when he has his own children someday. I have tried to give him the truth in a form he can carry, and the rest is his to figure out. What I know is this. He is sitting at the kitchen table right now, doing his 2nd grade homework, and every few minutes, he holds up his worksheet to show me a problem he's solved, and his expression when he's pleased with himself is one of the best things I have ever seen. He looked up just now and caught me watching him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," I said. "Good job on the math." He went back to his worksheet, satisfied, already onto the next problem. I let myself watch him for one more second. Then I picked up my pen and got back to work. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the confrontation, not the DNA results, not even the afternoon in the park when Ben showed Cassidy the shark page. It's the moment in the parking garage when I read my mother-in-law's text and something in me went very still, not panicked, still. Like some part of me had been waiting for the floor to show itself. I think about what it took to stay in that stillness instead of running from it, to not confront my husband that same night out of raw emotion, to build a case first, talk to a lawyer first, meet Cassidy before I blew anything up. I'm not telling that story to compliment myself. I'm telling it because I genuinely believe that the outcome, Ben knowing his mother, Cassidy getting her son back into her life, me keeping my integrity intact through all of it, none of that happens if I let the fear and the anger drive. Clarity is something you have to protect deliberately, especially when the people around you are counting on you to hold it together. What my husband did was a calculated thing. He saw an opportunity and he took it, and he kept taking it across years and across the daily fabric of our marriage, right up until there was nowhere left to take it. I used to wonder how someone could sustain a lie that large for that long. I've stopped wondering. People sustain what they don't have to account for. The lie lasted as long as it lasted because no one was asking the right questions with real determination behind them. Once someone did, it collapsed inside of 2 weeks. That's not a lesson about cynicism, it's a lesson about paying attention. About trusting the small unease that doesn't go away, the story that has one too many soft edges, the timeline that doesn't quite add up when you actually look at it. I spent 5 years being a good partner and a good mother and a competent professional, and I was good at all of those things. What I let slide was my own instinct that something wasn't sitting right. I'll carry that with me. Not as guilt. I refuse to absorb guilt for being deceived, but as information. There's a difference between trust and willful unawareness, and I think I let them blur. And Cassidy? I wasn't sepping about Cassidy because her part of this story is the one that gets me even now. She did the hardest thing I've ever witnessed. She got well enough to go looking for what she'd lost without any guarantee she'd find it or be welcomed when she did. She walked into that diner not knowing if I was going to be hostile or broken or someone who'd fight her for him. She showed up anyway. That kind of persistence. The kind that doesn't have a clear reward attached to it, that just keeps going because the thing on the other side matters. I have a lot of respect for it. I think it's the most underrated quality a person can have. Ben is 7. He has a long time to decide what this all means to him, and I intend to give him every tool I can to think it through clearly and honestly. That's what I owe him. Not a clean story, not a protected version of events. The actual truth, handed to him in pieces he can hold. He looked up at me tonight while he was doing his homework. Just checked in, the way he does. I looked back. That's the whole thing, really. Just that.